Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the Derate the Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. In my latest DTH conversation, I am joined by Bonnie Kristian, author of Untrustworthy, The Knowledge Crisis Breaking Our Brains, Polluting Our Politics, and Corrupting Our Christian Community. The discussion underscores the pervasive lack of trust in institutions and the media within our society. Kristian emphasized how this erosion of trust has far-reaching consequences, corroding the foundations of our political discourse and our communal integrity. Central to our conversation was the pivotal role of media consumption in shaping individual perspectives and contributing to the societal polarization. Bonnie stresses the importance of responsible media consumption. She highlights the need for individuals to cultivate expertise in a limited number of issues and to actively seek out media outlets that prioritize accuracy and transparency, issuing corrections when mistakes are made. By exercising discernment and holding media sources accountable, she contends that we can begin to mitigate the deleterious effects of misinformation and rebuild a foundation of trust in our shared public discourse. One of the many vitally important takeaways in this amazing conversations, my friends, is the tendency of some to see those with different beliefs as evil, and the importance of understanding different perspectives. Kristian addresses the allure of conspiracism and suggests that engaging in real-life community and conversations can help combat it. Friends, you do not want to miss this incredible conversation with my friend Bonnie Kristian. With that, here we go. Bonnie Kristian, thank you for joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So Bonnie, I've at the recommendation of a close friend of mine, I read your book, Untrustworthy, The Knowledge Crisis, Breaking Our Brains, Polluting Our Politics, and Corrupting Our Christian Communities. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to read this book, Bonnie, was because that friend of mine that recommended this is somebody that I'm working on a project called the Truth and Trust Project with, and he happens to be the former head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins. And the listeners of the Derate the Hate podcast know quite a bit about this, but I don't know how much you know about this. I've been very much outspoken about the government's response to the pandemic from the very beginning. Dr. Francis Collins was one of the, kind of the lead people in the government's response to the pandemic. We're both passionate in the idea that we need to rebuild trust in our institutions in this country to try and help mend the fabric. And it's one of the most contentious topics of our time. So when he mentioned to me that he was reading this book, I was like, okay, well, I definitely got to read it. So very excited, Bonnie, to have you join the Derate the Hate podcast today, talk a little bit about your book, talk a little bit about you, and really how this issue of trust became something you were passionate enough about to write this book. So thank you so much. First of all, Bonnie, let's just start. When was it that you started to realize that there was a huge lack of trust? Probably, for somebody like in the industry that you're in, media industry, journalism, that's one of them. But then how did it start to affect us, our brains as individuals, our trust in our institutions? How did that start for you, Bonnie?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it started through my work in journalism, and through, I would say, during the Trump presidency, especially, not uniquely or not exclusively because of him, but just in terms of the timing and how everyone was kind of losing their minds for a lot of that in a lot of different ways. But so I'm an opinion writer, and especially during that time where I was writing at the time, I had a lot of free range in what I wanted to write about, and a lot of discretion in what I wanted to research and read up on. So I was doing a lot of different stories, and some of them were about things that superficially might seem quite different. Some of them were about some of the like institutional trust issues. One of them was about, like, in my neighborhood, there were people who were just like really into political yard signs that were not about candidates. They were about sort of like declaring their beliefs and like what kind of a good person they were politically, like in the front yard, literally. Some of them were about the QAnon movement when that first came on the scene, the way that we interact with our experts, like, public experts, especially once the pandemic started. And over time, I gradually started to see that these were related in some ways, that they touched on a lot of common themes. Again, maybe it wasn't obvious superficially, but that they all came back in some ways to questions about, what do or can we know, who can we trust, why should we believe what we're being told, how do we decide who is trustworthy, and it also, at the same time, I was encountering a lot of similar stories in my own life and from people I knew, where people were having interpersonal conflicts over these kinds of questions, conflicts with their close friends, with their families, with their churches, where people who had, in many cases, shared many of the same beliefs, had grown up in the same spaces, had, in theory, so much in common, but would look, two people would look at the same thing and they couldn't agree that the same thing was there. They couldn't agree on not even just like what should be done, but what was sort of the shared basis of reality.
Right.
And so that combination of both like personal and professional things that I was seeing that all sort of seemed to circle these common issues of trust and truth were what sent me off in this direction.
Right. Yeah. And I know you drop in some very personal examples, Bonnie, and into the book. Like I believe your friend's name was Jim, right? And he was one. And trust me when I tell you, I've got people who I've had conversations with that are very, have that very similar mindset. Maybe not to the extent that they kind of gave up their dream of like a duplex in a city and then kind of sold off everything and bought a camper, but people who have become so absorbed in the narrative that they have changed the trajectory of their life because of things that are completely I don't want to say completely out of their control, but stuff that the narrative was controlled in some fashion by somebody who had or the media or some politician or some organization or whatever has this agenda. That's what I was looking for. Has this agenda to keep people divided, and they use that. I call it fear, outrage, and grievance. They use that fog model to keep us divided. But this, unlike times in the past, Bonnie, when there was always a little bit of it, but in recent years, past decade and a half, we've seen this huge uptick in institutions using that fog model, and it wouldn't be such a big deal, but people have really absorbed it, lock, stock, and barrel. They've taken it all in, and now they're starting to change the way that they do things. Right? I mean, one of the things that you talk about in the early part of the book is how the media that we consume is having a dramatic effect on how we see the others, right? It's creating these silos. We get into these echo chambers, and now this affective polarization thing starts, and we start to have these very distorted views of the other side. It becomes this us versus them. So talk to me a little bit about that, Bonnie, and how that plays into how we start to degrade trust, in each other, in the institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it really does have to do with, you've said the media, and I would broaden that to even just say like the technology of how we consume our media. And you mentioned the timeline of like the last 10, 15 years. At this point, I'm a little bit hopeful, and this is even more so than when my book came out about a year and a half ago now. There's I think a growing understanding of among many people now that there is actually something kind of wrong with the way that we like use our phones and the way that we're online all of the time. Consuming media constantly, and for everyone, it's not necessarily like social media, right? In some cases, it's talk radio or it's cable TV, whatever the case may be. We consume it at a much, much higher volume than we used to, significantly through our phones. And I think that that's a really big part of it because, as you said, there was always some element of this, right? It's not like people just figured out fear-mongering in the last 15 years. But the difference was that, like, the volume of this stuff that we're encountering really is different. And with that change in sort of just like the accessibility and the social acceptability of consuming it all the time, like nobody looks down on you if you are waiting in line at the grocery store and you pop out your phone and you start getting hyped on some politics for 5 minutes, right? But that just couldn't have happened before. You would be weird if you were, like bringing one of those, you remember those little tiny TVs people used to have? They're like 5 inches. You would be real weird if you were like bringing that around with you out in public, but nobody thinks anything if you're watching a video on your phone. And so I think the way that we become so intensely focused on, it's not just politics, but especially politics now. 20, 30 years ago, we would have called you a crank. Like there were norms and expectations of behavior that even people who wanted to fixate on this stuff, they had really practical limits and strong social limits that kept them from doing that, where you would, be expected to sort of like participate in the conversation. You would be expected to put down your newspaper. Like you just can't be doing that all day because you have a job to do. And now you can be doing that all day in many, many cases. And so, people haven't changed, right? Like we had all the same tendencies to want to get worked up about things and to think the worst of other people, and to imagine our enemies to be worse than they are, and to, have no interest in seeing someone else's perspective. But the way that the technology and then the resultant like behavioral norms and expectations have changed has allowed us to really indulge in that and to go deeper into that than we did in the past. And of course, it doesn't just stay limited to that sort of interpersonal model of like, I don't like this Democrat or this Republican. I know it spills out into this institutional scale of distrust.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And one of the things that you really dive into is when we are consuming that content online, how a lot of the political content that we see on social media, it's disproportionately from those who have distorted views from those on the other side in that that us versus them bucket. So they've already got these distorted views of those on the other side. They're saying some of the ugliest and nastiest things about those on the other side. We, in our own ignorance of those on the other side, want to prove ourselves right. So we just consume, we just continue to feed ourselves with that stuff that kind of proves our own, our own point in our own mind. And so it's kind of a perpetual cycle of ugliness, right? I mean, it just continues to feed upon itself and become its own monster.
Yeah, and I mean, there's this concept that I find really helpful from psychology, and I talk about this in the book called the hedonic treadmill. And basically, the idea is that when you, like, people, anyone, have sort of like a baseline of what feels like good or necessary to you, as your quality of life improves, they say the treadmill speeds up, like you start to want more. So a really classic example would be like you're living in a tiny apartment, like it's fine, it's okay, you deal with it. Then you move into a big house, and a couple weeks later, it's like, wow, how did I ever live like that before? Like, this is my new baseline. I always have to have a house this size. And I think something very similar has happened to us in how we think about each other, how we think about politics. It's like going from, maybe you used to be able to enjoy apples, but now you've had Doritos, and like, why would you go back? That's so boring. I hate that. And it's the same thing for us, right? Like we have reached this, it's such a high level of everything is, it's a thrill. It's a thrill. And that's what everybody likes to complain about the algorithms, but the algorithms ultimately reflect our tastes, and our tastes are bad, and our tastes are for, wanting the most exciting thing, the thing that really makes us feel afraid or angry or self-satisfied. And so that's what it serves up more and more.
Right. I mean, it feeds into that desire that our own brains are building, but as we feed that desire builds, and and that leads to the next thing I want to talk about, so how we've lost, or how so many have lost trust in the media. I mean, one of the things that I've talked about so much on this, Bonnie, and maybe I've been too critical of it, but one of the things that I talk about in a lot of my talks or on this podcast is this dumpster fire of hate, lies, and misinformation that I see this internet ecosystem of ours, social media and things, but whether it be media or social media or whatever, it's built upon this, entertainment, profit dynamic. They're there to entertain. They're there to make money. They are going to feed you what you seek, because if they feed you what you seek, you're going to come back for more. How has that affected I know you talk a lot about what we see in other media channels, and then the work that you do at Christianity Today. I guess my question for you then, Bonnie, is how do we, as consumers, if we want to be responsible consumers of media that we do find trustworthy, something that's actually going to provide us something positive instead of feed those negative impulses that we have, what are some good things to look for? Because I know I've fallen into this trap. I mean, I was one that used to be very angry, and for a long period of my adult life, I was a truck driver. And as a truck driver, I did what a lot of truck drivers do, and I love truck drivers. I still work with truck drivers every day, but it's a natural thing for us to listen to, say, talk radio 12, 14 hours a day. What can a responsible consumer do or look for, things that they can look for, knowing that there is that that entertainment and profit dynamic to the media, to talk radio especially, to keep us coming back, but it's in more than just talk radio, obviously. What can we do to help with things like that?
Yeah, so I want to say one thing as a preface, and then I'll say four things real quick. The preface is, it is true. The media is a business, and the media, we're not, certainly many journalists have high ideals about what they're trying to do. But it is a business. Like, we have bills to pay. We need salaries. Like, we are making a product just as much as anyone else is making a product. And we have customers, and the customers are what's commonly called our readers or audience, as the case may be. And so I think this is something especially that folks on the right, it's always curious to me that people who traditionally have had such an attention to like the market and how the free market works sort of kind of forget all that when it comes to the media and think that we're operating outside of market pressures. That's not true. Like, we operate from market pressures. And as you said, to a real extent, what the media serves is what our audience has told us that we want. Now, there are all kinds of qualifications to make on that. Somewhere like Christianity Today, where I work, we have concerns that go above and beyond making money, right? Like we have theological commitments, we have ethical commitments that also very much shape what we do. But, we also do have to pay salaries. So with that caveat to say, like, the media is a business, and I would say it's an industry that right now is in real trouble about kind of that money question, because our old business model is gone. We can't make money with ads the way that we used to pre-internet. And so I think that a lot of the very real flaws that you see in the media in the last 20 years are about kind of desperately scrambling to say, like, how do we do this now that the internet is here and we don't have a good answer yet? So with all that caveat aside, 4 things that I would say, turning from like the media side of things to the consumer side of things, to us as the customers or the readers, 4 things I would say. First is, I think it is very, very valuable for you to figure out a handful of issues that you are interested in, be this in politics or in some other sphere. Typically it's going to be politics, whatever the case may be. And when I say a handful, I mean like 6 on the outside. And when I say issues, I don't mean like, that one thing that Joe Biden said the other day. I mean like immigration policy, like something that's going to be something you can take an interest in over the long term, that you can learn about, that you can develop a real expertise. You can maybe read whole books about it, not just articles. You can maybe find out, like, even what is the relevant legislation? Who are the members of Congress that actually care about this, that actually do something good about this, so that you become a sort of expert. And when I say a handful, it's because you can't do that about most things, right? Like you have limited time, you have another job. It's never going to be most things. And when you're developing expertise in that, that also means you're taking attention away from sort of like the news writ large, like all the headlines. You can't follow all that. You got to pick your few things. You become, something of an expert about that. And when you have built up that knowledge base, that's going to make it so much easier for you to assess a news outlet, because you already have this background of information that you've developed from like media sources, by which I mean basically books, that work with different pressures. They don't have the timeline pressure. They don't have to be so quote unquote entertaining. They don't have to rush things out the door. It's just very different. And so you're coming to whatever your choice of media is, be it radio, be it TV, be it something you're reading online or in print, you're coming to it with that background of knowledge, and you actually have some basis for being able to say, like, is this a fair story? Are they covering this fairly? Like, is this true? Are they representing this person well? And that's going to make it so much easier to sort of parse between wildly varying qualities of media outlets. So that's the first thing, is to sort of develop some expertise for yourself on a very limited number of issues, and then honestly forget about the rest. Other people will focus on those, and the world will be no different because you didn't do it. The second thing is, very good point. It just, nothing will change. Nothing will change. That's right. The second thing is, and this is just sort of a broad thing, I would say any media outlet is an easy red flag to look for. Any media outlet that doesn't issue corrections when they make a mistake, it's a huge red flag, and you should not read
Absolutely.
them. That you're just absolute garbage if you won't issue a correction and say, like, hey, I got this wrong. And ideally, the correction would be just as prominent as the error. Sometimes it doesn't always happen. Sometimes there are like real practical reasons why that doesn't always happen. But there should, at least at the very minimum, the correction should exist. Mm-hmm. And ideally, it wouldn't happen only under like legal threat. If you have to sue somebody to get them to issue a correction, that's almost as bad as not doing it at all.
Exactly.
The third one I would say is, remember, again, the media, we are in a business. And so if you see something and you say, oh, that's good work, like I've studied up on this issue that I care about, this company is doing good work on this, give them some of your money. Don't like subscribe to them. I think we have this idea in the digital age, and I have it too, that any content that we come across online should be free for us. We hit a paywall and it's like a personal offense. Like, how could they do this to me? I had a right to this article and they threw up a paywall. And we might, like, I know many ways to get around paywalls, and many of us do.
Yeah.
But actually, no, you don't have any more right to that than you have to the newspaper in the Starbucks. All of the actual work of reporting, of figuring out what is factual, what is true, all of that is the same, whether it's online or in print. The only thing difference is the paper, and that's like a minor expense. So if you find good work, give them some of your money and then keep on reading them, because, you've already paid for it. So why wouldn't you go back again? And then the fourth thing I would say, and also subscriptions are different from others' income streams for us. Like having someone that is going to pay you every month. You don't have to do something that's like really entertaining because you know they're coming back. You don't have to make it about clicks and ads because you know people are coming back.
They're coming for the content, not the sensation.
Yeah, it's a much better model that has much better incentives for producing good, truthful work.
That's right.
And then the last one I would say specifically for Christians is to think about where the balance of your attention is going. And something that I encountered over and over and over again from pastors as I was researching this book. And sometimes it was things they would say to me. Sometimes it was things I would see in other people's interviews, like in news articles. Sometimes I would just like come upon it in the wilds of social media. And it was eerie because it was almost word for word from all these different pastors. And what they would say was, I get people for an hour a week, but Fox News or Twitter or MSNBC or whatever is their like media drug of choice gets them for 10, 15, 20, 30 hours a week, and I cannot compete with that.
That's right.
And so thinking about, your example of truckers, that's probably an extreme case because most people, do not have that much time to listen to talk radio. But there are a lot of people in jobs like that. There are a lot of people in jobs that approach something like that. And I would just say, like, where is the balance of your attention going? Because if your balance is like that, where you're spending, in theory, you're saying like, hey, God is the center of my life. Like, this is what I'm basing my life around. But you're listening to an hour of like a sermon and biblical teaching a week. And then you're spending like plausibly 40, 50 hours a week on here's why we hate those guys. Your heart is going to pattern itself after one of those things. And it's not going to be the thing you spent an hour on. And so, there's a lot of great sermon podcasts out there. There's a lot of other things that we could be, people who are in roles like that, or, commuting is a really big one for a lot of people who have these kinds of times that we tend to fill up with audio now. There are other things, and it's not just like, the intent of your heart is good, and like, wanting to want good things is good, but ultimately the amount of time you spend to each matters a whole lot. And good intentions can only do so much against sheer hours.
That is absolutely right. And you make such a phenomenal point there, Bonnie, in that, and it is almost eerie to think about when the pastors are saying, I get them for an hour a week, and whether it be talk radio, like I said, I mean, there were times when I would spend 70, 80, maybe 100 hours a week listening to talk radio and stuff like that. And even if I do believe, and I do believe in a lot of respects, some of these hosts have the best of intentions, but when all the content is geared in one direction, it's hard to look at it's hard to look at them, going back to that us versus them thing that I was talking about. It's hard to look at them objectively and say, okay, these people may have the best of intentions, or, I don't like the idea of intentions. I think intentions, as the old saying go, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But you do harden your heart. We as individual human beings, it's human nature. If we spend enough of our time, if we are consuming enough of that stuff that is geared towards talking about how bad those people are, we begin to tune out, and we forget how to see those others through an objective lens, and even believe that they may be good people. And that's another point that you make in the book is how, and this has come up in so many of my conversations here, whether it be on the D-Rate the 8 podcast or work that I do with Braver Angels, seeing the other side as evil becomes more natural than believing they are just wrong. And it's so hard. So talk a little bit about that, because there is definite evil in this world. And we can talk a little bit about that QAnon movement, which I know you talk about in the book, which I didn't even know what it was until I read your book. But there is evil, but not everybody who disagrees with us is evil. So talk a little bit about that, Bonnie.
Yeah, I think, so I often find myself as a little bit of a political oddball in a lot of spaces. I'm a libertarian. For a lot of years, we lived in St. Paul in Minnesota, deep blue neighborhood, like something like 98%, voting Bernie Sanders style Democrat, like not even, someone like Joe Biden, just like deep blue. And so, I was definitely out of the ordinary there.
Yeah.
And that's often the case in some of my media circles as well, where I would say sort of like a center left perspective is dominant, and then in more Christian and conservative media circles where I write as well, there everyone's a little bit more to the right of me politically, and an advantage of being put at such great length in contact with people who think so differently from me, and people who I like and who I work with and who I live near. Is that just sort of through the sheer force of exposure, you come to realize like, oh, this does actually make sense to them, and they do actually think that this would be a good thing, and I think that's insane, but you know what, she's great, and like, it's okay. And I hope her guy loses, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal in terms of how we relate to each other. I think I share in the book, there's this really great quote, I believe it's from C.S. Lewis, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something to the effect of like, something has gone really wrong in yourself when you hear a story and it's bad, and then you get sort of like an update and it's like, oh no, it wasn't quite that bad. And you find yourself sort of wishing that the worst version had been true because it makes your opponents look worse. Mm-hmm. And I think if we find ourselves having that reaction of where, it's not enough anymore to think about them as like, they were mistaken or, they were negligent. No, it had to be intentional. It had to be deliberately evil. Something has gone really wrong in ourselves. And as much as, maybe the other person's ideas legitimately are wrong, and maybe their proposals legitimately would have horrible unintended consequences. That is very often true. And I think about this. I read a lot about foreign policy. So like, it's literally life and death stuff. Like, I think that people that I disagree with are advocating for policies that will kill innocent people. Like, it doesn't get more high stakes than that. But I also know from long exposure that they sincerely think that they are advocating a better course that will save lives and bring peace faster. And I think they are wrong, but I also do not think that they are doing it to be evil.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And that's one of the things that bugs me so much about politics, Bonnie, is so often these politicians, especially obviously the ones that are the most bombastic, the most hyperbolic, they're the ones that get the airtime, right? But it's not the people that think like you and I do now, okay, they're wrong, but they're not evil. This is somebody I could have a conversation with because I don't see them as an evil person. I just see them as wrong. But the ones that get up there and get all the airtime are the ones that are saying, if this policy passes, it's literally pushing grandma off the cliff. Or if this, if we allow this agenda to continue, all elderly people are going to be, put into, ovens, whatever, right? It's those that are pushing that. It's not that these people are wrong. It's that they are evil. Those are the ones that get all the airtime. Those are the ones, and it kind of goes back full circle, back to that new media model, right? That feeds that thing that well, we have to continue to tell them they're evil because it keeps them coming back. It keeps them looking for the most extreme thing that's going to agitate. It's going to churn. So let's. I know we're getting very close to the end of our time. We're probably even a little over our time, but just if you give me a couple more minutes, because this QAnon thing really, and I make no. This is 100% true. I didn't even know what QAnon was. I heard people talk about it. People have actually mentioned it. People have actually mentioned it on my show before, and I've made no bones about it. I never knew what it was. I never even typed it into my computer. I heard people talking about it, and I'm like, this is not something I even want to know what it is. But when I went through your book, Bonnie, for the first time, I actually figured out what it was. And much like many of the things, until we consume something, we don't start to notice it, and we don't start to think about it, right? And many of those things go unnoticed because we're like, it's just not not at the forefront of our brain. It goes to something else I talk about a lot of. It's called the reticular activating system. We can only focus on so many things. Mm-hmm. So if it's not something that has any interest to us, we're probably not even going to notice it's happening. Mm-hmm. But after I read your book, found out what it was, I've actually gone back through my mental inventory of conversations that I've had with people, and I'm like, oh yeah, they espouse that point, or I heard this person. I heard somebody actually say today, two people in a conversation as I was walking past, not people I was talking to, but two people I was walking past today. I heard one say to the other, that's exactly how the cabal thinks. That's what they want it to be. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, okay. And then I like I said, I've gone through other, conversations in my mental inventory and remember things that people have said. And it's really disappointing that we've even allowed ourselves to get to this point. But the conspiracism thing, we're not going to, the QAnon that could be a whole nother conversation. I don't want to get too much into that. But you talk in the book about how we can retake some of our mental space. We talked a little bit, obviously, about how we can consume media better, but how do we retake that mental space that so much, so many of these things lead to conspiracism. We know conspiracism is a huge thing now, and it's something that you talk about a lot in the book. How do we retake that mental space, Bonnie, that we have allowed conspiracism to consume in our brain?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do because, so I distinguish between like specific conspiracy theories and sort of a broader mindset of conspiracism, which is very much, it's a very cynical mindset, but at the same time very credulous, very willing to believe things that you kind of want to be true, things that just, kind of make sense and sound like they could be true about people you already disliked. And so, I have no problem with skepticism. I think even, some conspiracies do happen. And so, some conspiracy theories turn out to be true. It's that broader mindset of distrust, unless it's very convenient to be trusting. And then, of course, you'll believe anything. In terms of getting out of it, it's a hard thing because I think it's something that if you confront head on, and usually this is going to be in others, though sometimes we might notice it in ourselves as well. It's very tricky to confront head on because it's usually not so much about like the X-Files style, like I've got the classified documents and I've traced out this whole theory and here's the logical step by step. It's much more of like a vibe, like they have bad vibes and I think they're sucking the blood of children. And so, the details don't really matter. It can sort of like evolve and the main characters stay more the same than the allegations do, right? Because it's really more about these people that you dislike than anything else. And that's hard to get out of. And generally speaking, I don't think sometimes you hear accounts of people who sort of got pulled out of it by arguments and research, but much more often, it's about like community and like what the kids online like to call touching grass, like just getting much more involved in like the good and normal things of real life and with other people, and having, times with friends and church and having another purpose in your life, essentially. Because one of the really attractive things about conspiracism is it says you are someone who knows the truth. You are someone who wants the good for the world, who wants to stop these bad people, and who by knowing what you know and spreading the word of this is taking an active role in making the world better and fighting evil and stopping bad people. And you're doing it probably online with your friends. And that's incredibly appealing. Like, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to be like stopping evil with your friends? That's literally what everyone wants. And so I think a lot of conspiracism in our time, really is very often rooted in loneliness and purposelessness, and a sense that things are bad in the world and there's nothing that you can do about it except maybe get into this thing, that this conspiracism that's come your way. And so generally I think that different things will work in different cases, but I think that it's getting out of that mindset and onto better things is much more about real life community, real life friendship, real life deep engagement with the church and with God, and with hopefully another better story. I would say the gospel about saving the world and stopping evil, which is not fighting enemies of flesh and blood and spreading wild rumors online, but is to be found elsewhere.
No, that's right. That's absolutely right, Bonnie. I mean, one of the things that I talk about so much here on the Derate the Hate podcast is, get out of this faux social environment that we have online and get out and actually interact again in real life, in our real communities. Try to get involved with your local organizations again, and whether it be a church or the Lions Club or the American Legion or somebody, and more importantly, try to get outside of our own echo chambers. You talked about the time when you lived in St. Paul, and you're living in the bluest of blue neighborhoods, which all of Minneapolis, St. Paul, anybody who lives in Minnesota knows that, the 7-county metro area down there, Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's bluer than blue, right? But the reality is we need, as individuals, so much of the work that I do is geared around us as individuals, how we can better our lives and in turn better the world in which we live. How do we mend the fabric of this nation? The work that I do with Braver Angels, find good communities, whether it be a church or an organization where we get outside of this faux environment online and truly interact, have those conversations with people of unlike minds. And I think that is absolutely how we start to battle this conspiracism. Show people who we really are. Don't take the word of the hyperbolic politician that's throwing bombs on Twitter all day long, or the media outlet that is geared or driven by that profit model, that sensationalism, that we're going to keep you mad all the time. Kind of thing. So, Bonnie, Kristian, your book on Trustworthy, fantastic. Way too much to get into in one short conversation here. It's been an incredible pleasure. Again, the knowledge crisis, breaking our brains, polluting our politics, and corrupting our Christian communities. Bonnie, Kristian, what are the final words that you have for the DTH listeners today? And then we'll wrap this up.
Oh man, on the spot. I guess on the subject of where we were ending already in terms of engagement with real life community. I mean, something that I always go back to is just talk about other things. Talk about your kids and your dog and your life and your vacation. And every time you are having that conversation, every time you are sitting down to dinner with someone, doing a potluck, whatever. Sometime that you are forced to put away your phone and they are forced to put away their phone, that is a win for both of you.
That's an absolute win. Well, thank you, Bonnie, Kristian, so much. The book is Untrustworthy, The Knowledge Crisis, Breaking Our Brains, Polluting Our Politics, and Corrupting Our Christian Communities. I encourage everybody to get it. Check out the show notes to learn more about Bonnie and how you can get in contact with her. Thank you so much, Bonnie, Kristian. You've been incredible, and I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.